Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Yes, this is Frank Hamilton, the Frank Hamilton, a good friend of Ruben Lopez. He called me Franco. You guys remember me, I'm sure. I was given the honor of eulogizing Ruben a while back when I was told that he had passed, and it really is an honor to me to be able to do so. I had hoped to at some point be back in contact with him, but since I'm an illegal alien and he couldn't cross borders, that just never came to pass. But I am just honored to be here amongst you guys, even though I'm not there physically. I wasn't able to come out to California. I now live in the Midwest. Travel restrictions and this whole COVID thing, I won't take any shots. So that really wasn't an option for me. And since I had been back and forth to California several times, moving out here to the Midwest, it just wasn't doable. But, I was given the honor of reading this eulogy. So I'll just start from the top now and we'll just go from there. Guitar slinger, genius, master negotiator, inventor, high level machinist, philanthropist, outlaw, leader, friend, husband, father, ass kicker. You'd really need a thesaurus to describe the person, talents, and assets of Ruben Lopez. He was a true Renaissance man whose list of skills, talents, and accomplishments could rival that of Leonardo da Vinci. Only da Vinci was never a philanthropist, guitar slinger, master machinist, or ass kicker. As a matter of fact, it's unusual that you'd find this extreme and complex roster of right and left brain skills in any one person other than Ruben, because most people are either artistic or mechanical, not both. At any rate, I think it's safe to say few people knew him as well as I did, because to me he was simply brother. I first met Ruben back in the early 90s when I did a shop tour of Red's San Diego. My assignment was to photograph Redosaurus, a monster car hopper. I was driving a Thunderbird Super Coupe and had a CD playing in the console. "Joe Satriani!" exclaimed one of Ruben's employees, who Ruben called Thelma. That's when I discovered that this band of misfits in San Diego actually had a heavy metal rock and roll band that jammed every night in the Red San Diego shop. Just a footnote here. I'm not sure if Thelma was actually his name or if that was a pet name that Ruben called him. Ruben called me Franco, so apparently there was an entire population of people whose pet names were not their actual names in Ruben's universe. It's funny, but I don't have any specific memories of Ruben from that first time we met. He was like that, a non-assuming character who drew little attention to himself wherever he went, but whose wheels were always turning, so to speak. It was Ruben's mechanical insight that engineered the gear that ran the machinery, literally. But I didn't realize it then. However, I was impressed with the car, a '59 Impala that was completely gutted and outfitted with a cantilevered hydraulic suspension. There was definitely nothing like it on Earth at the time. Fast forward a year, during my tenure as editor at Lowrider magazine. My buddy Dick DeLoach, that I met with Ruben at a Reds factory in Long Beach to shoot some product photography for them. I'm sorry. My buddy Dick DeLoach suggested that I meet with Ruben at the Reds factory in Long Beach to shoot some product and ad photography for them. They were new to the advertising game, but Ruben had some big ideas. So he and I brainstormed some stuff, and we became fast friends in the process. As a matter of fact, as our friendship grew, I would pick him up for breakfast every day in the early morning for me. I say for me because I later discovered that Ruben would get up 3 hours earlier each morning to get a solo session in on his guitar before I arrived, and those sessions would continue every evening when we would jam in his band at the shop. One late night, about 3 a.m., after a jam session at the shop, Ruben and I were much too tired to drive home, so we just laid on the floor there in the band room. No blankets, no mats, but the room was carpeted. Ruben laid face down on the ground. I remember he lifted his head and said, "I've got to stop living like this," then lowered his head and fell asleep. Besides our many times on the road and that one time in the band room at Red's, I've only seen Ruben sleep a couple of times. In fact, he had this way of yawning really loud that would wake the dead because it was more like a rebel yell, like he was actually trying to ward off sleep rather than embracing it. One of the times I saw him sleep was in Grauman's Chinese Theater watching the original Batman movie. This was actually a pit stop for us after we took in a local meal. We had to stay in town because I was waiting 3 hours for film to be processed at A&I in Hollywood. Ruben told me this was the first time for him in a theater because he rarely stood still long enough to take in a movie. It seemed kind of odd to me that this was his first time in a theater, but that was Ruben. He likely caught the first 5 minutes of the film, then crashed to the rest. It was a midnight showing of the movie, so I just let him sleep, figuring that he'd need to take in 20 winks or so. Ruben was no stranger to these marathon work sessions that were more like a thrash. One time, we had gone for a couple of days without sleep, then jumped on an airplane to fly to Louisville. We were there to talk some sense into a guy named Jake from Scrub City Hydraulics, who was a staunch customer of Lowrider Hydraulics, the competition. The beef was over the rules, so Ruben was there to extend an olive branch. After we were completely dissed by the guy, we drove to a hotel for the night. I remember taking a sip of water when Ruben asked me a question. I opened my mouth to answer his question, and as I spoke, the water I was drinking spilled out of my mouth. Ruben looked at me kind of puzzled and said, "How you forget you had water in your mouth?" I shrugged my shoulders and I answered, "Man, I'm tired out of my mind. We've been working for 2 days straight." To say Ruben was a tireless worker would be an understatement. The word work can likely be translated into the word Ruben in Greek, because to him, this was what life was all about. Ruben would say things like, "Que onda, Franco," which usually meant for me to get my act together. He would say things like nicely, of course, to describe how he would persuade somebody to change their mind, their course of action. His communications were always simple, but sometimes it would take a while for their deeper meaning to sink in. He would say, of course, as you would realize what he was saying in his own unique way. He would always speak to people on their level, sometimes dumbing it down to make his adversaries underestimate him. There was another side to Ruben, also, a more subtle, generous side. He would always seek out people who were more in need of assistance, financially or morally, than he was in need of their physical contribution. It was a very simple aspect of Ruben's character that you could only know if you spent a lot of time with him. One time, on one of our road trips from a car show in San Diego, I believe, we saw someone with a sign begging for a handout on the side of the road. We still had a load of Red's t-shirts, hats, and other items on board, so Ruben opened at the door and handed a large load of that stuff to him. When I consider this quiet, almost anonymous, generous side of Ruben's character, I suppose that's also what he did for me. They say blood is thicker than water, and even though we had a time of separation from each other with extenuating circumstances, I've always considered Ruben my brother. One thing is clear, you couldn't help but be a better person for knowing them, no matter who you may be.